All right, hello, this is Miss Stuckey. I'm making my first video, pretty excited. And what we want to look at today is solving quadratic equations using factoring. So the first thing we actually need to take a look at is the zero product property. And all this says is basically if you multiply two or more quantities and the answer is zero, then at least one of the quantities must be zero. We know that 0 times anything is 0. Looking at that algebraically, if I have two real numbers, a and b, and I know that a times b is 0, then either a has to be 0 or b has to be 0. In fact, a and b could both be 0 because 0 times 0 is still 0. Okay, so what's the purpose of this? How is this going to help us? Well, we're going to use it to solve quadratic equations. Look down here at the application. There's some examples here to kind of also look at, but we're going to look at this application. Notice here, I have x squared minus 5x equals 6, and I want to solve for x. I want to know what's the solution. So in order to use the zero product property, what I first have to do is I've got to set it equal to 0. My answer has to be 0. So what I can do is I can subtract 6 from both sides. When I do that, I end up with a trinomial equaling 0. Okay, I'm not quite ready to use the zero product property yet. In order to do that, it has to be a product. I have to have two things being multiplying. So if you look here, what they've done is they've factored. When I factor this trinomial, and I end up with x minus 6 times the quantity x plus 1 equaling 0, now I can use the zero product property. In other words, one of these two terms, either x minus 6 has to be 0 or x plus 1 has to be 0. I can solve each of those and I come up with the solution, x equals 6 and x equals negative 1. So this is another way that we can solve quadratic equations. Remember, the previous way that we looked at doing this was if I had a graph and I were to graph a quadratic function, then the place where that function crosses the x-axis, those are the zeros, those are the solutions. So in this case, if I were to go and graph this quadratic function here, if I made this f of x, then I would end up with a 0 here at negative 1 and at positive 6. Okay, for now I'm going to jump down. I'm going to skip 1 through 4. You can go back and answer those later. But I want to first look at 5, 6, and 7, and how am I actually going to go about solving that? So let's take a look at 5. Notice on 5, it's already written as two factors. So I have the product of x plus 5 and x minus 2 equaling 0. So using what I know about the zero product property, I know that either x plus 5 has to be 0 or x minus 2 has to be 0. So if I solve those, I'll get x is negative 5 and x equals positive 2. That's my solution to that quadratic equation. Okay, let's look at number 6 now. On number 6, I have a trinomial. It is a quadratic, and it equals 0. Okay, here they've already set that first step for me. I know it equals 0, but I can't yet use the zero product property because I don't have a product. I need to write this trinomial as a product of two binomials. So I'm going to go through and factor. What I'm looking for is two numbers that will multiply to give me negative 12 and will sum to a positive 1. So when I work through that and think through that factoring, I end up with x plus 4 and x minus 3. Notice here the 4 and the minus 3, or the negative 3, give me negative 12. And when I do the outside and inside, I end up with my middle term being a positive 1x. Okay, now set each of those equal to 0 using the zero product property. Let me actually take a step back here, sorry. Let's set x plus 4 equal to 0 and x minus 3 equal to 0. And when I solve those, I end up with x equals negative 4 and x equals a positive 3. Those are my solutions. Okay, I'm going to take a look now at number 7. Feel free to go ahead and pause the video here if you want to give it a try. Remember, the first step would be to set it equal to 0. Okay, so setting this equal to 0, I want to keep the coefficient of the x squared a positive 2. So I'm going to move these two guys over. When I do that, I end up with 2x squared minus 6x minus 20 equals 0. So I've set it equal to 0. I can use the zero product property, but first I need to factor. Notice here that 2, 6, and 20 have a common factor of 2. So I'm going to factor out that 2 first. And when I do that, I end up with x squared minus 3x minus 10 equaling 0. So when I actually go about factoring, I've got that 2 out in front. And then factoring the trinomial x squared minus 3x minus 10, that will be an x minus 5 and an x plus 2. Again, that gives me the negative 5, the positive 2, a product of negative 10, and their sum, when I do the outside and inside, gives me a negative 3x. Okay, the 2 out in front here, that's also a factor, right? 3 factors equaling 0. We could divide both sides by 2, and if I did that, then basically it's just these two guys equaling 0. So we can kind of ignore that too. When I set each of these equaling to 0 using the zero product property, either x minus 5 is 0 or x plus 2 is 0. Solve those, and I end up with x equaling a positive 5 and x equaling a negative 2 for my solution. Just a quick recap. First thing that we did, we took that equation, set it equal to 0. We factored, looking again for a GCF, set each of the factors equal to 0, and solve those equations. All right, on the next slide, I've got the answers to 1 through 4. So we can take a look at those. Make sure you think through those, and let me know if you have any questions in class. Thank you for watching.